Great. Well, everybody, thank you for attending. Hopefully you attended our first three panels of the day, and welcome to our fourth and final panel, which is how can I navigate disclosure and thrive as a postdoctoral scientist with disabilities? In the US, disability status is often overlooked, even though people with disabilities are underrepresented, and the statistics show prove that out throughout almost all of society. And we have two experts who are going to be talking about this today and hosting this in more of a workshop session than we had in our previous panels, which were more in a webinar and Q&A function structure. So we're lucky and very fortunate to have Aixa Alaman Diaz, who is dedicated to serve persons with historically marginalized backgrounds and their families, and scientists at all career stages in various capacities at work and in her personal life. She's currently one of 3 National Postdoc Association MPA diversity officers, and we're very lucky to have her in that capacity. Aixa was born and raised in Puerto Rico and is a social scientist now living in Washington, D.C. In her research, she develops qualitative projects centered on the residents' experience of the coasts impacted by climate change in Puerto Rico. She's a senior program manager for diversity, equity, inclusion at the American Geophysical Union. And we're also thrilled to have Brianna Blazer here, and through her work at the Do IT Center at the University of Washington, Brianna Blazer leads the NSF-funded projects that increase the participation of people with disabilities in science and engineering careers. She's the director and co-PI for Access Computing, an NSF broadening participation in Computing Alliance, PI for Access Advance, and co-PI or senior personnel on other related projects. Her work includes direct interventions for individuals with disabilities and working with faculty, employers, and other stakeholders to create institutional change. So we're thrilled to have Aixa and Brianna with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you also for all the organizers for the MPA Equity Summit. I know it's Friday afternoon in the East Coast and it's earlier in the Pacific. So we'll do our best just to finish up and wrap up this series of panels. In this case, it's a workshop. It's an online workshop about how I can navigate disclosure and thrive as a postdoctoral scientist with disabilities. My visual description: I am a brown skin female wearing a black blouse, long hair, also dark brown, with a green wall behind me. Brianna.
Awesome, thank you. It's fun to be here today. In a previous life, I used to interact with the National Postdoc Association, but it has been over a decade. I am a white cisgendered woman with brown hair and glasses, and I am sitting in front of also a green wall, but mine has a lot of artwork that my kids made for me on it.
So as we sort of like start the workshop, I'll share my screen. So you'll have sort of like ways to let us know whether it's the chat in this case, or Brianna, just let me know if you see someone sort of like trying to like tell us something. As I sort of like change to sharing screen right now, we'll sort of like do some brief introductions, and then we'll go into exercises as part of what we have planned for the next hour. So. And someone confirm that you can see an actual presentation mode of all my slides.
It looks great.
Okay. So let's.
Do folks have access to the slides, or would it be useful to drop our email addresses? We're on there in case anybody wants to reach out to us. Would it be useful to drop that in the chat, or do folks have access to the slides?
So the slides will be available after the when the session is uploaded, the recording is uploaded. But
okay, awesome.
You might want your emails for other reasons too.
Not a problem. Thank you, Tom. So again, as a preview of the next hour, we'll start with some just welcome introductions. We'll sort of like do inclusive introductions as co-facilitators, and then we'll dive into 2 exercises, about 10, 20 minutes each exercise, one for disclosing process and accommodations, the second one being more how to thrive in a temporary position and how to be proactive about your next job to build a career. And then we'll sort of like wrap up. We'll have some resources and some other things that we want to share, and sort of like also wrapping up the MPA Equity Summit. So by inclusive introductions, we mean various things. So I don't know if Brianna and I sort of like want to do different things just for you to see different models, but we just wanted to have a moment just for us also to share who we are, as we also sort of like try to invite you to share a little bit about you throughout this hour. So I'll start and then I'll pass it to you, Brianna. So I am a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a partner, I'm a friend, and my name is Aixa Aleman Diaz. She, her pronouns, and I am physically in Washington, D.C. I'm humbled to be here, and my goal today is to serve postdoctoral scientists with disabilities in a different way, sort of like in a more practical way. I'll pass it to Brianna.
Excellent. I don't always start these things by saying that I identify as a person with a disability, but I have both chronic health conditions and an anxiety disorder that I have come to understand how they impact my work. I am a mom. There's a reason I have my kids' artwork on the wall behind me, particularly during COVID. It was my not so subtle reminder that I had distractions at home while I was trying to work. Originally from the DC area, but live in Seattle away from the rest of my family.
Thank you. So as we transition, I may sort of like bring this idea that we're together apart, just as a way for us to create a space, a safe space where we can sort of like bring things and share things, and we can take the lessons out of here, but we don't take the stories or the personal identifiers outside of the space. So these are just examples from what I do in my program, AGU Lending, and these are just invitations for us to how to talk to each other, respect each other, and sort of like grow from a space of growth mindset or learning from each other. So we seek first to understand, then to be understood. What's said here stays here, but what's learned here lives here. And there are a few others, just again, invitations for us to have agreements in how we are sort of like connecting with each other for the next hour. Brianna, I don't know if you want to add anything here or.
No, I think this is good. I think there's also an understanding that we all interact in a space and during an event differently. So I just want to, as we are asking for participation, honor and respect that folks come to that in different ways. So, messages in the chat are more than welcome. If you want to message things anonymously to me, I can read them without reading names. Using the hand raising function is welcome, or if you have your camera off and we physically see a hand go up, I just want to encourage folks that, to interact and participate in the conversation in the way that makes the most sense for you.
Thank you. So here's our first sort of like exercise in terms of like trying to use the next 10, 20 minutes just for us to really go deeper maybe in some topics, but also to have a moment for participants, those who are in the room, to also share a little bit about why you're here and sort of like decided to take 1 hour of your day to be here with us and sort of like go from there. So I will only right now give a preview and then I'll stop sharing so that we can go more in gallery mode so that we can like see each other and sort of like see if that helps also for the conversation and the dialogue. But the first exercise we wanted to hone in around the big topic of disclosing process and accommodations. If we want sort of like, we have some videos, but I think that sort of like an easier place for us to start is really asking you, why are you here? And what are goals that you hope to get from sort of like this workshop right now? That's maybe a place where we can start to share. So I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can see in gallery, all of us, and sort of like go from there. Brianna, I don't know if you want to do any table setting for the videos or just like completely open for participants. Just
I think one thing to think about, and I came to working in the disability space from other topics related to equity, and we just don't talk about disability a lot. We don't often show up in a room. Even though I work in this field, I don't always show up first thing by saying I'm disabled myself. And so I think sitting back, connecting with one another and also learning from other folks' experiences is important. I think the other thing we can say about that too, and then I will stop talking, is oftentimes when we are talking about people with disabilities in particularly academic settings, we are talking about students. And the assumption is that we're talking about accommodations in the classroom, not accommodations necessarily in a research setting. So as we start to think about, and there's increased conversation about postdocs and faculty with disabilities, some of the ways that we talk about disability and how we accommodate it, both proactively and reactively, need to change as we're thinking beyond just, again, that idea of students as the disabled folks in our environment.
So we want to hear from you if you are willing, or we invite you to share a little bit of why you're here, and it can be connected to our topic of disclosing process and accommodation, or it can also be something else. We're just like trying to gauge who's in the room and what are your own sort of like goals for being here with us. So I see, so you can like, yeah, I see Stefano like raising hand, so you can unmute and sort of like go from there. And I also see a comment on the chat.
Can you hear me fine?
Yes, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly. So go ahead and like share that with us.
That's okay. It's Stefano, but that's okay. I'm Stefano Cataldi. I'm a social research scientist, a postdoc technically at Columbia University. I'm here because I do a lot of work with diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility here at Columbia, and so because of my lack of experience with the accessibility aspects, I kind of just wanted to learn more about it so we can represent better. And so I think the two things that probably I was more interested to learn about, and the previous sessions were really informative a lot for these kind of things, is one, how to be more proactive, because a lot of the conversation that we have with Columbia University is how do we make contract language, especially with our union, but more in general in the university policy, on making adjustments that are proactive rather than, they always say like, oh, but if anybody has a problem, they can come to us. Like, yes, as it was mentioned earlier, that requires time and effort from the person, and usually it's not a quick resolution, versus we want to be more proactive, where the people that come here already have a welcoming environment where they don't have to worry about creating that accessibility resolution. And the other is also how to engage people with disability a little bit more, so we can learn what is needed without having it to be, as a person that is queer and has done a lot of work for the queer community, is always, you don't want to be the person doing all the work. You like for someone else to do the work for you for once. And so our group would like to be that, but we also need the expertise from people that have the experience. And so we approach them without asking too much of them, and asking to be in another yet working group and another type of like level of effort that you have to do. So like those kind of two levels.
Thank you. I'll see if there are others that want to chime in, and then maybe we can take some of that. I'm just like checking various places just to see if someone else wants to chime in terms of why you're here and what are your goals. I see one in the chat. Go ahead, Brianna.
Oh, I was just going to say, I see one in the chat. And again, I am being mindful to read aloud things from the chat rather than assuming that folks are reading that while also listening. So those are some of those kind of universal design strategies that I think about doing things proactively. Cindy says, hi, I'm Cindy Rosalbo from Dartmouth, and as Director of Postdoc Affairs, I want to be able to advocate better for postdocs and other colleagues with disabilities and help coach postdocs in having conversations from both sides as future mentors. I love that. Yes, thinking about postdocs as mentors too, as well as how we are supporting postdocs with disabilities.
So I'll share some thoughts in how and while we wait. Oh, Kate, I think I see your hand. So maybe go there, and then Max, if I'm saying your name correctly.
Kate, yes. I'm the speaker from previous session. I'm a research assistant professor of medicine. I train master's level students. And I think I mentioned that I've had both very bad experiences with accommodations and these. all of my disabilities that I've tried to get accommodations for have been in the postdoctoral setting and beyond. Well, actually, I wasn't a postdoc. I was a trainee in another way. But I have either had very bad accommodations where I like fought for 5 years for access for a bathroom unsuccessfully, or very good examples like my boss who gave me accommodations from day one, my current boss. So, but you know, my students navigate this very formal process of accommodations on the university side. I'm appointed on the medical center side. And so just getting strategies to help them navigate that process is something that I'm interested in being here for. And I realize you're doing postdocs, but hopefully there'll be some things that will cover me too.
Thank you. Max?
Yeah, hi. I'm a postdoc and I'm autistic, and I've joined today because I found it extremely hard to find any kind of resources about how to advocate for myself, but also where I can turn to ask for help for accommodations and what kind of accommodations I can ask for. And yeah, in research institutions, you often feel very alone, and yeah, lonely maybe as well, with all the struggles you face on a daily basis, but also don't really know where to start and what to ask for. So I was hoping that this panel today was giving a bit more pointers and also maybe a bit of inspiration for the future to see people with similar experiences and in similar positions and how they manage.
I had some thoughts and responses, and this is kind of jumbled, but I was jotting down some notes of ideas of things that I see. And I think one thing is that it is hard to find disability community, particularly because we don't all walk around with a sign that's like, hey, come talk to me about this. And so I think that is something that we really need to do more of. I think the accommodation piece, our universities, medical centers have not figured out what that means when we're talking about researchers. And as I talk to folks, as I read about folks' experiences with that, I think so much of it is done informally through self-accommodation, through interdependence and finding ways that we can work together with others, which is not necessarily the way it should be. A lot of that too comes to concern about the budget for accommodations. Is that coming out of grants? Is that coming out of departmental budgets? Are you looking, is it coming out of a central fund? And what implications does that have for the organization? And then one other thought, I know a computer scientist that was on the job market a couple of years ago, and she's an accessibility researcher and she is blind. So this is a little bit different than other stories. She can't walk into an interview and it's apparent she's blind, right? They're going to know that when she's in an interview, she can't not disclose. And her research is all about accessibility. So somebody who's recruiting her clearly has an interest in accessibility. And when she was on the job market, she was negotiating for accommodations. This is what I want. This is what I need to be successful. And was able to get that in several offer letters from the universities. Now, she ended up going to industry, so I will never know how well that would have worked out for her, not worked out for her. But it was such an interesting idea to me and can prevent some of the things that I think we see where folks end up in a position. And I think this is particularly dangerous when we were talking about a postdoc position, don't have their accommodations set up. And then there's this waiting period where they don't have access to things. And yet they're still supposed to be productive and they're going to be measured against the amount of time that they were there, even if their needs weren't met to allow them to do their work. I'll say one other thing, and then I see Luann posted in the chat as well. Another thing I've been really fascinated by is I work more on the NSF side of funding things. And the National Science Foundation has a mechanism called a FASED, F-A-S-E-D, award or supplements for grants, facilitation awards for scientists and engineers with disabilities. And in theory, you can request them for accommodations and equipment that somebody with a disability who is personnel on a grant. So a researcher, whether that's a grad student, a professor, a postdoc, to get access. And I have not very many people who have gotten those. And when they have gotten them, I have gotten one, it has been for something straightforward like sign language interpreting. But some of the less straightforward things I have had, I've heard stories of NSF pushing back and saying, why won't your university provide this accommodation? Get documentation your university won't provide. And we know universities aren't going to document that. I could talk all day about that. I'm going to stop talking.
I can read some of the
Do you
things
want-
on the chat, and
do you wanna read
then
it?
these participants ones also like chime in if you want as well. So I'll start reading and then go from there. So Luan says, I am an administrative director of the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs at Boston Children's Hospital. I'm also a member of the Research in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at our institution. And like others have said, we're often trying to make changes reactively. I wanted to learn more how to make our institution more accessible proactively.
Can I just add something? So sorry.
Go ahead.
So the other problem that we have, and you would think we wouldn't because we're a hospital, that a lot of thought goes into making the hospital accessible, but the research buildings are older and tend to try to be retrofitted. So, and also in Boston, we rent a lot of space. So we recently had a problem where we had somebody in a wheelchair, but our card pads are too hard for them to scan. So we were propping the doors open, and because we rent, we got in trouble with the real estate company. But we had no other choice because there was no way for this person to get to work. So
That's a little bit of what I wanted like to put a parenthesis here. Like it happens that I was like in a webinar earlier this week for people with physical disabilities and how they were sort of like disclosing in the hiring and in the work sort of like employment process in a way. And a lot of the lived experiences from 4 panelists in different sectors, in different stages, were like resonating with like they are just basic things we need, like from, like waking up and transportation and sort of like, like basic things to get me from my house to the job, that it's part of some accommodations that physical disabilities may require. And I would say sort of like on the other end, like invisible disabilities may also have specific accommodations that you also need to be aware and to be able to ask, whether that's flex time, double time. I mean, sort of like aligning deadlines with supervisor and sort of like in terms of around a project or around a task or an event. Just are some thoughts in terms of my own experience as I sort of like support students, undergraduate and graduate students, and also the more I sort of like hearing from lived experiences with professionals with disabilities in this context. I want to read one more chat message, and also if the participant wants to chime in, feel free. So this is from Grace. My goal for being here is to learn. I have been on the receiving end of accommodations as a student, but I am new to the diversity, equity, inclusion, and access spaces in the role of a facilitator and advocate. And I recognize that I'm uniform about the approaches, resources, strategies that I can apply to support researchers. Basically, now I'm in a position where I can provide support, but I want to educate myself on how to do that intentionally, proactively, and with awareness of the best practices. Just giving a moment just in case Grace want to chime in. Okay. So if not, then I don't know, Brianna, if you have some other reactions, but like a lot of what Brianna and I are also sharing and we'll share on the slides are resources that we have been sort of like critically trying to bring to share and to sort of like to bring the nuances, but also to bring hope and inspiration about how to like navigate both the individual and the policies in different sectors so that you're also empowered by sort of like having that access to that information as well. So
I think I would just say one thing is that something to keep in mind, those of you who are coming from DEI type offices, is what you even know about people with disabilities in your institution, whether you have data and have ever looked at that data. If you're doing climate surveys, are you asking if folks have a disability? Because so often we aren't even looking at data or asking the questions about whether people with disabilities are in the environments that we are in. So I just want to mention that as well, because I think that is so often, you're clearly thinking about it because you're here to have this conversation. But that's something I've seen in the past.
I'm wondering, Brianna, if we want to like bring some of our resources and sort of like go from there, sort of like to circle back in some of the things that have been like shared, and then from there we can consider exercise 2, or simply just continue to have a conversation. Okay.
Sure. If I'm going to share resources, I'm going to start pulling books off my shelf here. This is how I like to talk and think about things. But there was a great book that came out earlier this year by the social scientist Margaret Price called Clip Space Time. Literally, it is on the shelf right behind me. But this is specifically based on interviews with faculty with disabilities, which I think there are a lot of similarities given the precarity of it. Postdoc is different than, although non-tenured or untenured faculty also have precarity, but it was based on interviews of faculty with disabilities about what their experiences were in getting accommodations, and really trying to explain the experience of disability in an environment, thinking about, for example, the unpredictable nature of some disabilities and how that isn't necessarily well understood by institutions and institutional policies. So that's one really good, if you're trying to get a better, wrap your head around things, or just see even, yes, other people have had this experience. It is a dense and theoretical book, but there are a lot of good stories that you can pull out as you're reading it.
Yeah, and I added on the chat, and this is part of our resources. Like, it happens that I have had the experience through a chapter rather than a book, a little bit theoretical in some levels, but also very practical in how to do writing, let's say at the graduate level or in the academic setting, and how when you have invisible disabilities, that requires very different time management and planning and implementation, and sort of like how to really think through what writing means with sort of like integrating it in a more proactive way so that you can go from beginning to end in just a different rhythm or in a different way. So this is another good example for what Brianna was sharing for that book as well. So let me share my slides. We'll sort of like go into resources so that we can sort of like tap on some of the questions and some of like the interests that we have heard so far, and then we can sort of like circle back to exercise 2 in a different way. So let me.
I will talk a little bit while you're sharing your screen. I'll just mention that the organization I work for, Do It, at the University of Washington, has many resources and webinars on our website as well, talking about the disability experience. Again, some of this is from the viewpoint of faculty with disabilities, because our Access Advanced project, which is called that because of the NSF Advanced program that works to increase the participation of women in STEM faculty careers, is where the funding comes from, that because we're interested in women faculty with disabilities. Anyway, I will drop some of those links in the chat as well, because we have some of those things. I'll let you talk about what's on the slide.
Yeah, and also like through this workshop and through my conversation with Brianna, sort of like coming with resources and being more proactive about how to sort of like find ways to have critical reflections about what accommodations look like with different kinds of disabilities, but also for navigating temporary appointments like postdocs, but also as you're also thinking of your transition into a job or into a career, like how would that look like? Would it look the same? Would it look different? So that's also a little bit of where we're coming from. But I was my lesson learned is that you can even think of other groups like faculty so that you can bring some of the lessons that could apply to you as a postdoc. And that's something that at some point I was not necessarily considering, but like I think that's part of the spirit of why we're sort of like bringing some of the things that exist that can also maybe apply to you in some ways, because when resources are scarce, we also need to make sure that we also tap onto what exists and what has been sort of like proven to work. So in terms of what you're seeing on the slide, you're seeing right now some books or some articles or some things that can help you sort of like find maybe authors or maybe topics that could be potentially of interest, and also coming from the lived experience. In terms of how professionals and persons with disabilities are navigating life at times, like the The third one, My Body is Not a Prayer, it really comes from a much more like broader sort of like stance. And other books like Uncharted or like the second one, Against Techno-Ableism, they're coming from the STEM sort of like views and sort of like trying to bring really personal essays and lived experiences about how would it look to be, I know at least one essay, it's from marine sciences. So like, how would it look to be in a particular part of STEM and how to navigate that when you are sort of like navigating disabilities as part of your journey. Other books like the fourth one, it's about disability justice. So it's all maybe a new topic altogether that could also be a source of inspiration and also advocacy about what it can mean for you to sort of like look out for things like universal design for learning that we have already mentioned as a potential like source of things to bring to include all types of learners, but also to present information in different mediums so that we can help enable the learning of more and more people in the room. And I'll sort of like say two more comments and then stop just in case Brianna want to chime in. The fifth ones are ADHD books. Again, we were also thinking not just of like one disability, we were trying to be broad in what we meant by disabilities. So these two books are, one of them is more like things you can do in your everyday life that can potentially apply to education or jobs or things like that. That's the ADD friendly ways to organize your life. But the one before, the ADHD Guide to Career Success, it was really oriented to bring how to think through asking for accommodations and what would be ways to think about accommodations having ADHD, which is an invisible disability. So like, it's one of the few books that I have found that actually have practical advice as part of the sort of like the way to think about navigating employment and hiring and things like that. And I also know the Kathleen Nadeau, being an expert, sort of like it's looking for solution, it's being proactive, and it's looking for advocacy in how the book is written. I can stop there just to see if Brianna wants to chime in about this ones. We have one more slide of resources.
No, I think that was great. I was looking for, I'm dropping links in the chat to help folks find things. Is My Body is Not a Prayer, is that My Body is Not a Prayer request, maybe?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I will drop that in the chat then.
So then let me take you to one more slide and then, oops. So here is a different kind of resource altogether. I call it organizations and more because they can be things that are funded and that are happening again within STEM, broadly speaking, that could apply sort of like to the lived experiences of postdocs with disabilities, but also it can be things that are a little bit more like how to make events more accessible and more inclusive of all learners and all people. Like those are the ones on the bottom. And also there has been effort, there are efforts right now in terms of a National Academies report and workshop called Beyond Compliance, that it's sort of like bringing also not only like more context, but it's also bringing some recommendations about how to sort of like provide tools, but also resources and literature around it. So, and I frame it that way in the context of that. I think one of the messages is not just being proactive as if finding just the strategy, but also understanding more of the context of the list of experience in order then to sort of like support seeing the options and the choices that there are. I can stop there just to see if you want to chime in, Brianna.
I was just going to say the NASM Beyond Compliance series was great, and I saw Melissa Lynn from NASM was here. I don't know if she's still here, but that was a great series. I will drop the link into the chat about that as well. There's recorded webinars of that discussion as well as a report that are particularly useful. The other thing I wanted to call attention to on here, two things. One is, I think a lot of times, and we mentioned the book Uncharted, which is essays by disabled scientists, and there's a lot of talk in there about research conferences and the accessibility issues around them. So one of the things mentioned on here is from the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery special interest group on accessibility has both a virtual conference guide, an accessible virtual conference guide, and an accessible conference guide that really talk you through step by step. If you are running a meeting, what sort of things should you be thinking about sharing with your participants? And so if that is something that you are doing, whether it is within your organization or a wider national meeting, there are other accessible conference guides out there as well. If you look around, and I could point you in directions of other ones. I mostly work with computer scientists, so that's one that I use a lot and love. The American Chemical Society also has some good resources and reports on disabled scientists, so those are also worth checking out. I see there's an ACS Inclusive Language Guide. There's also a really great one from the National Center on Disability Journalism. So if you're thinking, ooh, I just heard the word hard of hearing, is that the right word for me to use here? It literally talks about language and which ones are good to use. So I really love that.
So, and we also know that there are organizations that can be connected to STEM or connected to universities or connected to sort of like more local community levels. We are not listing them because we know there are many sort of like, but if you want that kind of information, we can at least point you to some of those organizations that exist. And again, they may vary by the types of disabilities and also whether it's local or national, like in terms of chapters in your state or in your area versus maybe something like Disable in STEM that's like more specific to STEM fields and professions. So I can go back just to introduce exercise 2, but I'm looking at time and I know that we need to be mindful because we're the last workshop in the day and we also want to leave some time in the end just to wrap up also the event. So I just want to share what we had in mind, and then we can check in gallery just to see if we want to go that route or if we want to continue this conversation. So I'll move my slides, so bear with me here. I'm going to go backwards. So a different topic that we thought it could be of interest, and I think it was part of some of the answers when we ask about why you're here in a way, has to do with specifically the postdoctoral appointment being a temporary position and really help you to think through what it means to be proactive. And I would add here more like about being proactive as you're a postdoc and sort of like thrive as a postdoc first. And then from there, sort of like, okay, what are maybe steps that I can take so that I can start to think about what is next for me and then how to help you navigate that critical transition in a way that makes sense. And maybe time may be something to consider, and maybe it may take a different sort of like pathway or direction. Here's where we have some of the organization listed because we were thinking just to be a little bit more creative and out of the box in terms of what we meant for the topic for the exercise. So again, we're just open and we just wanted to bring some ideas from our end, but we want to check in with you in terms of what would be a good sort of like questions or if you have a different topic altogether. So Brianna, I don't know if we want to chime in and I can sort of like stop sharing in a minute or two.
Yeah, I would love to hear from other folks. I don't have anything to add, I guess.
Okay. So again, and we're going to share the slide after this, so you'll have this information. So I'll stop sharing just to see what's the pulse of the room and go from there. So if you have comments or questions, here's a moment in which you can chime in.
I think I'm also curious to hear from folks about like what resources do you wish existed, either to directly support folks with disabilities or to support organizations that are thinking about how to be more welcoming and accessible. Max.
Yes.
I think I wish people were just generally a bit more educated because there are so many stereotypes out there. And I find it hard to disclose a disability, especially invisible, because even though, especially in the STEM field, people tend to be open-minded, there's still a lot of stigma around it. And even if people want to be helpful, sometimes they just aren't at all. So basic guidelines for how to deal with invisible disabilities, being just the vocabulary or how to address things. So encouraging to ask questions instead of judging or being annoyed.
I think we lost some of your audio. I don't know if you want to chime in again, just like the last few sentences. Max? Now you're muted, but I think that we lost just one or two sentences in the end. You said about encouraging, asking question, and then I think there is when we lost you a little bit.
Yeah, I think my connection broke down for a second.
Not a problem.
Yeah, just having, I don't know, some basic guidelines on how to interact with people with disability, and being open-minded about it, and yeah, basic education, removing a bit of the stigma around invisible disabilities.
Thank you. I'll sort of like echo that invitation from social sciences. At times, asking questions and probing questions is the way to go, especially if you're wanting to understand someone else's experience. So in the context of what I think it's encouraging, asking question is really like being present and sort of like asking questions that can help you connect and understand. It's just a strategy altogether in order to have a better sense of what is the lived experience, and go from there, kind of like level. So I see another hand from Grace, and I see some things going on the chat. So let's start with Grace and then go to the chat after.
Thanks. So I think my question kind of stems from Brianna, what you brought up earlier about, do we even have the data to back up changes that we might need to make at our institution? And it makes me realize, no, we don't. In my institution, we don't. And in the broader community, science community that my institution serves, the space science community, we don't have this data. And so I think that's something I wish I had, was any kind of survey or workforce data to back up what would actually be needed by the community. And I'm not sure really how to tackle that, but that just brings up a blind spot that I absolutely had. So thanks.
I can drop a link in the chat to an article I wrote on this a couple of years ago, and I will tell you what we have done in computer science. And again, this is work that I am funded to do, so it's not like an extra thing I am doing on top of other work. But literally, we have just called out organizations that are not collecting the data and then tried to work with them and address, here's a way you could collect that for example, folks who are using institutional data. And over a number of years, we have seen change on that, but it has been a decades-long process of identifying issues, giving some example language for ways to ask that question, because folks are even afraid to ask it. But I will drop a link to that paper in the chat if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'll speak from more of a programmatic approach. It happens that Grace and I are in earth sciences, so I hear that in terms of not having some data with some of the groups that we serve. But if you have a program, especially a program where you have touch points with your participants, especially one-on-ones, I'm learning that actually postdocs with disabilities have been one of the most proactive individuals that are reaching out to me and sort of like asking about different aspects of their journeys. Some of them have never disclosed and are realizing they have disabilities, and they're sort of like trying to stay in the postdoctoral appointment so that they can have a better sense of what comes next, but also like already empowering themselves so that they can actually ask for the things they need, but also find the spaces, the work environment spaces that will get them there. It has been mentioned a little bit before, postdocs may not necessarily provide the timing needed for asking for formal accommodation to be implemented in some ways because of all the things connected to that process. So I'm bringing those lived experience examples because I think that it's way more nuanced how people are going through thinking about finding sort of like the support systems or the information or the strategies to then make decisions and actually implement them. So others are navigating just like I know that I can ask for accommodations, but I'm sort of like trying to decide which pathways and how then I'll be sort of like looking for the resources kind of like level. So again, people come from different vantage points about how they are sort of like connecting their professional goals and how then to bring their lived experience of disabilities in a way that makes sense or not being upfront about it and I'm disclosing, or I don't know if I'm going to disclose right now. I may disclose later. I'm sort of like thinking and looking for the support systems to get there kind of like level. So I think I see one comment, like a question. Are there resources on how to best pitch the idea to the institution? For example, when suggesting an improvement, also providing the solution that is feasible, easier for them already. So it's more likely the university will say yes, and more importantly, will actually do it. I also see some other comments. So I don't know if Brianna, you want to chime in just to read them or like just answer one at a time and then go from there.
And say, I don't think I have an easy or great answer to that. Unfortunately, I think institutional change is slow. I think there is movement starting to make some of this a little bit better, but I think it is very slow. And Luann just raised another great point in the chat. You know, another challenge we have is the majority of our research fellows are from abroad and do not know their rights. And so, you know, I think how we theorize disability and differs from country to country. So I have had this experience too in working with international grad students who realize there's a whole different set of rights and you know, are able to seek, for example, mental health care that they might not have sought back home. And so that's a whole nother piece to this, the cultural aspect of disability.
Or even defining disabilities. This is a little bit of what we were hinting in the book resources, like saying disability justice can mean something very different than disability in the medical context than sort of like other ways to frame disability. And I think all this has consequences for the kinds of accommodations, the kinds of like aspects of everyday life that are part or not part of what we imagine is part of disabilities. All those are important in the context of this conversation, just to be aware that the more critical and the more nuanced may also help to really let the person who may be going through those experiences to actually share and go from there. So I know that one of the questions we had is about the system itself, but also as we have been sort of like elevating at some points of this conversation, there's a lot of individual personal experience too. So it's sort of like how to make sure that we are providing and creating space for both is also part of what I think the system needs, but also we need to create the spaces for that to be part of the conversation. So please chime in if you did something in the chat that we haven't addressed. I'm sort of like trying to go up the chat, but I'm not sure if I'm missing some of the comments or some of the questions. So just to make sure that we're addressing them.
There's a great conversation here about accommodations, and Kate has provided some resources from their website, as well as pointing to the JAB Accommodation Network, which is askjan.org. which has some example accommodations. I know I will share that I have had conversations with disability services professionals who don't want to share examples of accommodations because of the individualized nature of the accommodation process. And that is based on how the ADA has been interpreted and how institutions have to respond to it. But I thought that is such a frustrating thing to hear from an institution, particularly as some folks with disabilities are navigating new diagnoses and trying to figure out what might help. And the institution is basically, no, you tell us what you need, right? And so these are great resources, Kate, and thank you for sharing them.
Yeah, that was also why I was elevating the individualized and lived experience so much as well. Partly because, again, in the law or in the policies or in the systems, at times I think we lose sight of that. But that's also what's driving why and when someone will want to disclose and ask for accommodations, and sort of like where in the system or in the process of hiring or being employed, all that is connected through what has happened before, during, and after, right? So it's like the lived experience is a key part of the equation here. So
Can I ask a question?
go ahead.
All right, so it seems a little weird to me, like at least with our examples, we were lucky enough that we had some of our fellows volunteer to be on the committee with us and help us with this. But it's, it seems as if most of the institutions leave it up to, like you were saying, where the money's going to come from in the departments and whether it comes from the provost and whether it comes from the chair. And why, is there a overall reason why procedurally this isn't handled like occupational health if somebody's hurt on the job? Because you think they would be the best people to evaluate which accommodations each individual needs, and they do that individually? Does anybody have any ideas? 'Cause like, at least at our institution, if something happens to you after you're hired, you're evaluated by the occupational health team, which then makes all the necessary accommodations for you.
I mean, I have not had that experience. Yeah, in academic setting, because universities just saying, tell us what you need, and then they either will or will not approve it. And it varies dramatically from institution to institution. So I have a colleague who, when she started a new job, thought she would be able to get the same accommodation she did at her previous institution and did not.
Yeah. Yeah, and in my experience as well, that what I've seen is like in public or nonprofit sector, like it seems to be on the person connected to the supervisor, connected to maybe HR at some process. But again, it's not clear that there's like an office and a different office that will sort of like help you or intervene, sort of like to get the accommodation.
Because I guess the way I'm thinking about it is I had two different instances. One was a temporary disability. They broke their arm and their shoulder, and OC Health made the evaluations for accommodation. And the other one was I had somebody in my group who was at the marathon bombing and suffered PTSD after. But when they came, they did not have PTSD, so OC Health evaluated and gave recommendations for accommodations. They didn't have to know what they needed. OC Health worked with them to help them find it.
Oh, that's great.
It's kind of weird.
I just want to, Alberto mentioned in the comment, I have a listserv that I maintain as some of my projects where I share resources every week that are at the intersection of disability, accessibility, education, and employment, and science, engineering kind of stuff. So if that is of interest to you, I always am happy to add folks to that list, and you can drop me an email at blazer, blaser@uw.edu, and I'd be happy to add you to that list.
And I will amplify that. That's actually how Brianna and I connected. Partly I've been on the look for people who are building communities and building resources, information, and sort of like connecting research and data in some level for persons with disabilities. And this is one of the few places that I've found so far that is actually like ongoing, and it's like weekly and things like that. And also we created this space here in terms of providing an actual event, a two-way communication, so that we can talk about a topic that I realize now after like months of preparation that there's not that much out there. So even more than to my inclination and the dedication sort of like to think about postdocs with disabilities, like it has given me a very different sort of like perspective, not finding what I thought it would be available kind of like level. So we have one question, and then after that, I may wrap up so that we can be on time. Go ahead, Alberto.
Yeah, I can just follow up because it's similar to the question I asked in the previous panels, is that this community, while very large, the numbers are comparable probably to certainly race and ethnicity groups. There isn't a national membership advocacy group. The Foundation for Science and Disability exists, but it's essentially just, I think, a college scholarship program, and it run by sort of like an individual as a nonprofit, but not really a membership society or advocacy group. And then AAAS's Entry Point is a really well-known intervention, but mostly internships for undergraduates and maybe graduate students. But so it's a curious gap. And so I've been finding various initiatives. Brianna's is probably the largest listserv that's sort of pan-institutional and maybe not by design, but now becoming multidisciplinary, even though it maybe just started with computing science. But then there are a lot of grassroots groups. Disabled in STEM has a Slack group. STEM with Disabilities is a like a WordPress site. And so the graduate students and postdocs are trying to do things, but in terms of a sustainable organization, much like the NPA, I haven't found that. So it's a curious gap.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And that's also part of the spirit of this event. And also, as you can see, even from our resources, organizations, books, or just like national reports, like we have seen that trend to be part of like the scenario and the context today too. I would say not only for postdocs or scientists with disabilities, but for professionals with disabilities. Like there's a little bit of a bigger group here, not just in our community. So Brianna, I don't know if you want to have some last words, and then I need to wrap up the event.
This has been a great conversation, so I'll just leave it there and try to be mindful of time.
So the same for me, has been sort of like great to see that we have had a back and forth with all the participants and with many of the participants. And thank you, Brianna. Thank you, the interpreters and Tom. I'll do some wrap up messages here. So if you are not a member of the National Postdoc Association yet, please join. It is free if your institution is part of the National Postdoc Association, and check the MPA website. And I believe someone will sort of like add a link in the chat as I am sharing this information with you. So, and also thank you for your interest in promoting equity in the postdoctoral community and beyond. We hope to see you in Boston in the annual MPA conference, where we can continue this conversation. And don't forget to register. There are early bird rates right now. And also, I think the link may be in the chat. But all in all, thank you for being here. It is our pleasure sort of like to offer this space for all of you. And we'll share the slides, and then we can like also save the chat and maybe add that as well, since there has been many resources there.
Thank you, Isa. Thank you, Brianna. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for being part of this tight-knit community, especially this session 4 that we had as a special workshop. Appreciate you.